I'm sorry, but we're looking for someone who can keep up with our fast-paced environment. The interviewer didn't even look up from his laptop as he delivered the rejection. 22 years old, wearing a hoodie and sneakers to a job interview. He'd already decided that the woman sitting across from him didn't belong at Nexus Tech. She was 52. Her resume showed a 10-year gap in employment, and she'd asked what agile methodology meant during the technical screening. "I understand," the woman said quietly, gathering her worn portfolio. Her name was Dr. Catherine Walsh, though the interviewer never bothered to read past Kathy on her application. What he didn't know, what nobody at Nexus Tech knew, was that this outdated applicant had written the original code that their entire billion-dollar platform was built on, and in exactly 2 weeks, she would save their company from complete destruction. They had just rejected the most brilliant programmer they would ever meet. I wonder where you're watching this story unfold from today. Perhaps you're in Silicon Valley or a tech hub like Seattle or Austin. Maybe you're in a small town watching and wondering about your own career journey. Wherever you are, you've probably witnessed age discrimination before. In tech, it's almost expected, but rarely does someone have the power to prove just how wrong those assumptions can be. The background. Catherine Walsh's story began in 1987 when she was the only woman in her MIT computer science graduating class. While her male classmates were being recruited by IBM and Microsoft, Catherine had to fight for every opportunity, every interview, every chance to prove herself. She didn't just prove herself, she excelled. By 1995, at age 30, Catherine was the lead architect at a startup called DataCore Systems. The company had developed revolutionary data management software, fast, secure, and scalable in ways that nothing else on the market could match. Catherine had written the core algorithm herself. Thousands of lines of elegant, efficient code that could handle massive amounts of information while maintaining perfect security protocols. It was beautiful work, the kind that other programmers studied and admired. DataCore grew quickly. By 1999, they were processing data for major corporations, healthcare systems, and financial institutions. Catherine's team had expanded to 15 engineers, and she was being mentioned in tech publications as one of the industry's rising stars. Then came the acquisition. Tech Giant Corporation, one of the industry's major players, offered $500 million to buy DataCore. The founders accepted immediately. Catherine, who owned only a small percentage of equity, had no say in the decision. "Don't worry," the Tech Giant executives told her during the transition meeting. "We're keeping your team intact. You'll have even more resources to develop the platform." They lied. Within 6 months, Tech Giant had restructured the entire engineering department. Catherine's team was disbanded. Her role was consolidated with another division. The new leadership wanted to bring in fresh perspectives, which meant hiring younger, cheaper engineers who would work longer hours without questioning decisions. Catherine was offered a position reporting to a manager 10 years younger than her, with half her experience and a third of her technical knowledge. When she pushed back on questionable technical decisions, she was told she wasn't adapting to the new culture. "Tech moves fast," her new manager said, with barely concealed condescension. "Maybe you're just not keeping up anymore." 6 months later, Catherine was laid off in a round of performance-based cuts. At 35 years old, she was already being treated as obsolete. The wilderness years. Catherine spent the next 15 years trying to rebuild her career. She updated her skills constantly, learned new programming languages, took online courses, attended conferences. Her knowledge was deeper than ever. But none of it mattered. Every job application hit the same wall. "We're looking for someone with more recent experience. This role requires familiarity with modern development practices. We think you'd be happier in a more senior advisory position," which never seemed to actually exist. The tech industry had decided that programmers over 40 were dinosaurs. By 50, they were essentially invisible. Catherine tried hiding her age on applications. She removed graduation dates from her resume, used a younger photo on LinkedIn. It worked sometimes. She'd get interviews, but then she'd walk into the room and she'd see it in their eyes. The immediate dismissal, the mental door closing before she even sat down. She took consulting work when she could find it. Freelance projects, teaching coding to kids at the local library. But the prestigious positions, the interesting challenges, the work that had once defined her life, all of that was gone. By 2023, Catherine was living in a modest apartment in Queens, her savings nearly depleted. She needed steady income, and she'd learned that the tech industry she'd helped build no longer wanted her. That's when she saw the LinkedIn message from Nexus Tech. The discovery. Catherine recognized the name immediately. Nexus Tech had built their entire platform on DataCore's original code. Her code, after tech giant acquired DataCore, they'd licensed the technology to various companies. Nexus had been one of them, eventually buying the code outright and building a billion-dollar business on top of it. They were using her work, getting rich off her innovation. And they didn't even know she existed. But Catherine knew something they didn't. When she'd written that original code back in 1999, she'd built in several hidden security measures, backdoors and protocols that only she knew about. It was her insurance policy, her way of maintaining some control over her creation. More importantly, she'd never documented a critical vulnerability, a flaw in the authentication system that was nearly impossible to find unless you knew exactly what to look for. She'd planned to fix it before launch, but the acquisition had happened so fast, and in the chaos of being pushed out, she'd never had the chance. For 20 years, that vulnerability had sat there, hidden in thousands of lines of code, and if someone with the right knowledge discovered it, they could bring down the entire Nexus Tech infrastructure in minutes. Catherine had been monitoring Nexus Tech's public code repositories. And 3 weeks ago, she'd seen something that made her blood run cold. Someone was probing the edges of that vulnerability testing, exploring, getting closer. A hacker, sophisticated, patient, and very, very dangerous, was about to exploit the flaw she'd created. Nexus Tech had no idea they were about to be destroyed. And even if they knew, they wouldn't be able to stop it. The only person who truly understood that code was the woman they were about to reject. For a data entry position, Catherine applied for the job, knowing she might be their only hope. Not because she owed them anything, she didn't, but because hundreds of companies relied on Nexus Tech's platform. Hospitals, schools, small businesses. If the system went down, real people would be hurt. She couldn't let that happen, even if it meant accepting an 18-an-hour data entry job at a company built on her stolen innovation. The rejection. The interview was worse than Catherine had imagined. Jake Morrison, the hiring manager, was 22 years old. His LinkedIn profile boasted about disrupting legacy systems and bringing fresh energy to outdated processes. He'd graduated from college just 2 years ago. He kept Catherine waiting for 20 minutes, then appeared with his laptop tucked under his arm, clearly planning to multitask during the interview. "So, Kathy," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "tell me about your experience with modern data management systems." "I've worked extensively with data architecture," Catherine began. "I was the lead Sorry, let me be more specific. Have you used Salesforce, HubSpot, any of the major CRM platforms?" "I've used various systems, but my background is more in building—" "Right, okay." Jake was already typing on his laptop. "And you're familiar with agile methodology, Scrum frameworks, that kind of thing?" Catherine hesitated. She knew what agile was. She'd watched it become popular years after she'd been forced out of the industry, but the terminology had changed so much, and she didn't want to pretend expertise she didn't have in the specific framework he was asking about. "I'm not formally trained in agile, but I'm a quick learner." Jake looked up for the first time, and Catherine saw the dismissal in his eyes. "Look, Kathy, I'm going to be honest with you. Nexus Tech moves really fast. We're a startup environment, even though we're growing. We need people who can jump in and immediately contribute, who understand modern workflows and can keep up with our pace. He glanced at her resume again, clearly seeing the dates she couldn't hide. Your experience is interesting, but there's a pretty significant gap here, and the tech landscape has changed a lot. I'm just not sure this is the right fit. Catherine felt the familiar sting of rejection, but this time, underneath it, was something else. Determination. I understand, she said quietly, but I should mention, I have specific experience with your core platform. I actually worked on the original data core system that Nexus Tech is built on. Jake's expression didn't change. That's great, but data core was like 20 years ago. We've completely modernized since then. Built on top of it, optimized it. The original code is basically just legacy infrastructure at this point. Legacy infrastructure that runs everything, Catherine said. Sure, but we've got plans to phase that out completely. My team is actually working on a full platform rebuild right now. Modern architecture, microservices, the whole deal should be done in 6 months. Catherine felt ice in her veins. They were planning to replace her code, the code they didn't understand, with something new, and they had no idea what they were about to trigger. Jake, she said carefully, that legacy code has some very specific security features built into it. If you're rebuilding without understanding how those features work, you could create serious vulnerabilities. Jake actually laughed. No offense, but our security team is really solid Stanford grads, former Google engineers. I think we can handle updating some 20-year-old code. He stood up, the interview clearly over. Look, I appreciate you coming in. We'll keep your resume on file. But honestly, I think you'd be happier somewhere with a slower pace, maybe something in tech support or documentation. Catherine gathered her things. She could tell him the truth, who she really was, what she'd built, what was coming. But looking at Jake's condescending smile, she knew he wouldn't believe her. Nobody at Nexus Tech would. They'd have to learn the hard way. The infiltration. 2 days after her rejection, Catherine received an email from Nexus Tech's HR department. Dear Ms. Walsh, while you weren't selected for the Data Management Associate position, we'd like to offer you a temporary contract position in our Document Processing Department, $18 per hour. Night shift, 3-month contract. If you're interested, please respond within 24 hours. Catherine stared at the email. Document processing, the lowest rung on the corporate ladder. A job they were probably desperate to fill because nobody wanted to work night shifts for minimum wage. It was perfect. She accepted immediately. The night shift meant the office would be mostly empty. She'd have access to computer systems without constant surveillance, and nobody paid attention to temporary contract workers. They were invisible, just like she'd been for the past 15 years. Catherine's first night at Nexus Tech confirmed everything she'd suspected. The company had expanded rapidly, but their security protocols were sloppy. Temporary workers were given basic access credentials that weren't properly restricted. The legacy code she'd written was still running in the background, critical and untouched, while the engineering team focused on their shiny new rebuild. And the hacker was getting closer. Catherine could see the probing attempts in the system logs, sophisticated queries testing the boundaries of her old authentication protocols. Whoever this was, they knew what they were looking for. They just hadn't found it yet. She had maybe 2 weeks before the vulnerability was fully exploited. The humiliation. Working night shift document processing meant Catherine was around during the engineering team's late-night sessions. Young programmers fueled by energy drinks and startup ambition, racing to meet the deadline for their platform rebuild. They never acknowledged her presence. Catherine would push her cart of documents past their workstations, hearing them joke and celebrate their progress. She was just part of the furniture, another middle-aged woman in a company polo shirt, invisible and irrelevant. One night, she overheard Jake Morrison talking to his team about the rebuild project. We're targeting September 15th for the full migration, Jake announced. Everything cut over to the new platform, all the old legacy code retired. It's going to be huge for the company. What about the security review? Someone asked. Already done? Security team signed off on the architecture. We're good to go. Catherine, filing documents nearby, spoke up. Excuse me, have you tested the migration against the old system's authentication protocols? The entire team turned to look at her. Several people exchanged glances, clearly wondering who this random document processor was and why she was listening to their conversation. Sorry, who are you? Jake asked, not recognizing her from the interview. I work in document processing. I have some background in data systems, and I noticed you're migrating from data core architecture. That system has some unique security features that might conflict with... Thanks for the input, Jake interrupted, his tone making it clear her input was not welcome. But we've got actual engineers handling this. No offense, but data migration is pretty complex. Maybe just focus on your filing? Laughter rippled through the group. Catherine felt her face flush, but she stayed quiet. She'd tried to warn them. They weren't interested in hearing it. 2 days later, Catherine was called into HR. Ms. Walsh, the HR representative said, her tone formal. We've received a complaint that you've been interrupting engineering meetings and offering unsolicited technical advice. Your role is document processing. I need you to stay in your lane and let the engineers do their jobs. I was just trying to help. I understand, but it's not appropriate. This is your official warning. If there are any more incidents, we'll have to terminate your contract. Catherine nodded, saying nothing. The irony was almost painful. She was being warned to stay away from code she had written by a company built on her innovation because she was just a document processor. But she didn't argue. Being underestimated had its advantages. She went back to her night shift, back to being invisible, and she kept watching The Crisis, September 15th, 2:47 a.m. Catherine was processing documents in her usual spot when she saw it. The system alert that she'd been dreading multiple unauthorized access attempts. Authentication protocol breach. Security systems going offline. The hacker had found the vulnerability. Catherine immediately logged into the system using her basic credentials. She'd been slowly expanding her access over the past weeks, careful not to trigger any alerts. Now she navigated to the legacy code infrastructure, where she could see exactly what was happening. It was worse than she'd feared. The hacker wasn't just exploiting the vulnerability, they were using it to inject malicious code that would spread through the entire platform. In approximately 30 minutes, every system Nexus Tech managed would be compromised. Customer data would be encrypted and held for ransom. Financial systems would collapse. The entire company would be destroyed. And because tomorrow was the planned migration to the new platform, nobody was monitoring the old system. Nobody knew they were under attack. Catherine pulled out her phone and called the security desk. This is Catherine Walsh, contract worker in document processing. You need to get the security team online right now. The system is under attack. Ma'am, is this about a computer virus? You should contact IT support. This isn't a virus. It's a targeted breach of your legacy authentication system. You're going to lose everything in less than 30 minutes if you don't act now. There was a pause. How do you know this? Because I'm looking at it right now. Get Marcus Chen, your CTO, on the phone immediately. Ma'am, I can't just wake up the CTO because a contract worker thinks there's a problem. Catherine hung up. They weren't going to believe her. She was going to have to fix this herself. She opened her laptop and connected to the system. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory built over decades, navigating through layers of code, finding the exact location of the breach. The hacker was good, really good. They'd found the vulnerability and exploited it perfectly. But they didn't know about the secondary protocols Catherine had built, the hidden safeguards that only she knew how to activate. She started typing commands that hadn't been executed in 20 years. The discovery. Marcus Chen arrived at the office at 3:15 a.m., furious about being woken up for what security had described as a possible false alarm triggered by a contract worker. He walked into the operations center expecting to find panicked security staff overreacting to a minor glitch. Instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. Every monitor showed red alerts, system compromises spreading in real time. And in the corner, sitting at a computer that should have been locked down, was a middle-aged woman in a company polo shirt, typing faster than anyone Marcus had ever seen. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus demanded. "Who is that?" "She's from document processing," the security supervisor said. "She's the one who called it in, and then she just started fixing it. We tried to stop her, but I'm the only person in this building who actually knows how this code works," Catherine said, without looking up from her screen. "Marcus, I need you to shut up and let me work for exactly 8 more minutes. Then I'll explain everything." Marcus started to object. This woman was using his systems without authorization, potentially making everything worse. But something in her voice made him stop. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't guessing. She was working with absolute certainty, like someone who knew every line of code by heart. "Who are you?" Marcus asked. "Someone you should have hired 3 weeks ago." Catherine's fingers flew across the keyboard. She was activating protocols that didn't appear in any documentation, using commands that the system shouldn't recognize. But it was responding to her touch, like an instrument responding to its creator. 7 minutes later, the red alerts began turning green. The breach was contained. The malicious code was isolated and neutralized. The hacker's access was cut off completely. Catherine hit a final command, then sat back in her chair, exhausted. "There," she said quietly. "Your company is safe, for now." Marcus stared at the screens, then at Catherine. "How did you do that?" "Because I wrote this code 25 years ago, when it was called Data Core, and nobody at this company had even heard of it yet." The room went silent. "My name is Dr. Catherine Walsh," she continued. "I was the lead architect at Data Core Systems. That legacy code you were planning to retire tomorrow? I designed every line of it, including the security vulnerability that almost destroyed you tonight and the hidden protocols that just saved you." Marcus's mind was reeling. "But we interviewed you. Jake said you didn't know anything about modern systems. Jake rejected me because I'm 52 and I asked what agile methodology was. He decided I was too old, too outdated, too irrelevant to work at a company built on my own innovation." She pulled out a worn folder from her bag, the same portfolio she'd brought to the interview. Inside were original design documents, technical specifications, and code samples that predated Nexus Tech by a decade. "This is the original Data Core architecture," Catherine said. "Every security feature, every protocol, every line of code that's currently keeping your billion-dollar company running. I built it. And when your shiny new migration goes live tomorrow, all of these safeguards will be gone. The next attack won't take 30 minutes to destroy you. It'll take 30 seconds." Marcus looked at the documents, then at his security team, then back at Catherine. "Why didn't you tell us this in the interview?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "Would you have believed me, a middle-aged woman with a resume gap applying for data entry? Or would you have done exactly what Jake did, assume I was delusional and shown me the door?" She stood up, gathering her things. "I took this job because I saw the attack coming, and I knew innocent people would be hurt if Nexus Tech went down. Hospitals, schools, small businesses. They all depend on your platform. I couldn't let them suffer because your engineering team was too arrogant to understand what they built on." "Wait," Marcus said. "Don't leave. We need to talk about this." "Talk about what? How your company is built on stolen innovation? How you were about to destroy everything tomorrow because nobody bothered to understand the legacy code? Or how you rejected the one person who could have prevented all of this because she didn't fit your image of what a programmer should look like. Catherine headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, your new platform architecture is solid. The engineering team did good work, but you're missing 3 critical security layers that exist in the old code. Without those, you're vulnerable to at least 5 different attack vectors that I can think of off the top of my head. Then help us fix it, Marcus said. Why would I do that? Because Marcus struggled for an answer. Because it's the right thing to do. Catherine smiled sadly. I spent 15 years being told I was outdated, irrelevant, too old to contribute. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To have everything you built and created and poured your life into just dismissed like it never mattered? She walked to the elevator. Good luck with your migration, Marcus. I hope your team is as brilliant as they think they are. The Reckoning. Catherine went home that night expecting to never hear from Nexus Tech again. She'd done what she came to do, prevented a catastrophe. Now she could disappear back into obscurity. But at 9 a.m., her phone rang. Dr. Walsh, this is Richard Chen, CEO of Nexus Tech. I need to meet with you immediately. Name your price for a consulting contract. I'm not interested in consulting. Then name your price for anything we need your help. Marcus told me everything, and I've spent the past 6 hours reviewing the migration plans. You're right. We're about to make a catastrophic mistake. Catherine sighed. What about Jake Morrison? Is he going to supervise my work and tell me I don't understand modern systems? There was a long pause. Jake no longer works here, Richard said quietly. Neither do the 2 engineers who laughed when you tried to warn them. We've spent the morning reviewing how this happened, how we built an entire company on revolutionary code and never bothered to find out who created it, how we rejected you for not knowing agile methodology while planning to dismantle the most sophisticated data architecture any of us had ever seen. So now you believe me. Dr. Walsh, I looked up your background, MIT PhD, lead architect at 3 major companies, published papers that are still cited in computer science courses. You're not just brilliant, you're legendary. And we treated you like you were incompetent because you're over 50 and had the audacity to be honest about not knowing a project management framework. Richard's voice cracked slightly. I'm ashamed. On behalf of everyone at this company, I'm ashamed. Catherine felt something shift in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of it. What are you offering? She asked. Chief Technology Architect, full equity package, complete authority over the migration project and all future platform development, and a public apology from me and the entire executive team for how we treated you. I don't need an apology. Yes, Richard said firmly, you do. And so does every other older worker in tech who's been dismissed and underestimated and made to feel worthless because they didn't fit someone's idea of what innovation looks like. The transformation, Catherine took the job. Her first day as Chief Technology Architect, she walked into a conference room where the entire engineering team was waiting. Many of them had seen her during her document processing days. Now she stood at the head of the table, holding the authority they'd denied her. Good morning, Catherine said. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Catherine Walsh, and I built the platform this company exists on. For the past 3 months, I worked night shift processing your documents while listening to you mock the outdated legacy code that was literally keeping you in business. She pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. Today, we're going to talk about everything your migration plan was about to destroy. And then we're going to fix it together. Over the next 6 months, Catherine led the most successful platform migration in Nexus Tech's history. But more than that, she transformed how the company thought about experience, wisdom, and the value of legacy knowledge. She hired 3 other programmers over 50, brilliant engineers who'd been pushed out of the industry and told they were obsolete. Together, they built something remarkable, a blend of cutting-edge technology and time-tested security practices that made Nexus Tech's platform the most robust in the industry. Catherine also implemented a new hiring policy. Every technical interview now included at least one engineer over 40 in the panel. Resume screening was done blind, with graduation dates and age indicators removed, and any interviewer caught making age-based assumptions was immediately removed from hiring duties. Jake Morrison, before he was terminated, had left Catherine a bitter voicemail. "This is reverse discrimination. You're just bitter because you're old." Catherine never responded, but she did frame his rejection email from her original interview. She hung it in her office with a small plaque underneath. A reminder that your value isn't determined by people who can't see it. The vindication? 1 year after Catherine's hiring, Nexus Tech hosted its annual company meeting. Catherine stood on stage in front of 800 employees, receiving the Founders Innovation Award, the company's highest honor. Dr. Walsh not only saved this company from catastrophic collapse, Richard Chen announced, she rebuilt our culture from the ground up. Our platform is more secure than ever, our engineering team is more diverse and experienced than ever, and our profits have increased by 40% because we finally understood the value of wisdom and experience. The applause was thunderous. Catherine looked out at the crowd and saw faces of all ages, young engineers working alongside seasoned veterans, learning from each other instead of dismissing each other. After the ceremony, a young programmer approached her nervously. She looked about 25, fresh from college. "Dr. Walsh, I just wanted to say, I was one of the people who laughed when you tried to warn us about the migration. I saw you as just the document processing lady, and I didn't take you seriously. I'm really sorry." Catherine smiled. "Thank you for saying that. What's your name?" "Emma Rodriguez." "Emma, can I tell you something important? In 20 years, you're going to be standing where I am now, and there's going to be some 22-year-old kid who thinks you're outdated and irrelevant because you don't know whatever trendy framework is popular that year. When that happens, remember this moment. Remember that experience and wisdom don't have an expiration date." Emma nodded, tears in her eyes. "And also remember," Catherine continued, "that the person processing documents or cleaning floors or answering phones might be the smartest person in the building. Everyone has a story. Everyone has value. Don't make the mistake of thinking you know someone's worth based on their age or their current title." The legacy. 3 years after joining Nexus Tech, Catherine was featured on the cover of Tech Innovator magazine. The headline read, "The programmer they said was too old is now revolutionizing the industry." The article sparked a movement. Other companies began reviewing their age discrimination practices. Several major tech firms implemented experience hiring programs, actively recruiting seasoned professionals who'd been pushed out of the industry. Catherine became a speaker at conferences, talking about the value of diversity, not just racial or gender diversity, but age diversity, the wisdom that comes from decades of experience, the importance of learning from people who've actually seen technology evolve. But she also remained grounded. She still remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to have your entire career reduced to not a good fit. On her office wall, alongside her framed PhD and her various awards, Catherine kept that rejection email from Jake Morrison. Visitors often asked about it. "Why keep something so painful on display?" they'd ask. "Because I never want to forget what it feels like to be underestimated," Catherine would explain. "The moment I forget is the moment I might do the same thing to someone else." She also kept in touch with the other programmers, over 50 she'd hired. They called themselves the Legacy Team, a joke that became a badge of honor. Together, they'd proven that innovation didn't belong exclusively to the young, and that the tech industry's obsession with youth was costing them brilliant minds. Epilogue. 5 years after the crisis that almost destroyed Nexus Tech, Catherine stood in front of a classroom at MIT, her alma mater. She was teaching a course on software architecture, but today's lesson was different. Today we're going to talk about something that's not in your textbook, Catherine told the eager young students. We're going to talk about the human cost of how we treat experience in this industry. She told them her story. The rejection, the humiliation, the moment she almost gave up entirely. I was one of the lucky ones, she said. I had the chance to prove myself, but there are thousands of brilliant programmers, engineers, and innovators who never got that chance. They were dismissed at 40, 45, 50, told they were obsolete before their best work was even done. A student raised her hand. But doesn't technology change so fast that older experience becomes less relevant? Catherine smiled. Technology changes fast, but fundamental principles don't. The best code I've ever seen was written by programmers in their 60s who understood not just how to make something work, but how to make it last. They'd seen trends come and go. They knew the difference between innovation and just repackaging old ideas with new names. She paused, looking at the young faces staring back at her. Here's what I want you to remember. In 20 years, you're going to be the old programmers. Someone younger is going to look at you and think you're outdated. When that happens, I hope you remember this lecture. I hope you remember that your value isn't measured by how recently you learned the latest framework. It's measured by what you can create, what you can solve, and what you can teach. After class, several students came up to thank her. One young woman, barely 20 years old, seemed particularly moved. My mom used to be a programmer, the student said quietly. She quit when I was born and hasn't been able to get back into it. Everyone tells her she's been out too long, that she should try something else, but she was really good at it. I remember watching her code when I was little. She loved it so much. Tell your mom to apply to Nexus Tech, Catherine said, handing the student her card. We're always looking for brilliant programmers who've been overlooked. The message. If you're watching this story from wherever you are in the world, maybe it resonates with you. Maybe you're someone who's been told you're too old, too experienced, too overqualified for positions you're perfect for. Maybe you've been made to feel like your years of knowledge and wisdom are somehow a disadvantage. Here's what Catherine's story teaches us. Your experience is not your liability. It's your superpower. The same industry that dismisses you for having too much experience is the one that desperately needs the wisdom that only experience can provide. And if you're young, reading this and thinking it doesn't apply to you, it will. One day, sooner than you think, you'll be the experienced one. The question is, will you remember what it felt like to be underestimated? Will you treat others the way you'd want to be treated when your turn comes? The tech industry, all industries really, lose so much by discarding experience. They lose institutional knowledge, historical perspective, and the kind of deep understanding that only comes from doing something for decades. Catherine Walsh was one of the brilliant minds who built the internet as we know it. And she was rejected for a data entry job because someone decided she was too old to be valuable. Think about that. Think about how many other Catherines are out there right now. Their talents wasted, their innovations lost, because someone looked at their age and decided they'd already peaked. Age discrimination isn't just unfair, it's stupid. It robs companies of talent, robs industries of innovation, and robs individuals of dignity and purpose. Catherine got her vindication. But millions of others never will, unless we change how we think about experience, age, and value. So the next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your image of what expertise should look like, whether because of their age, their appearance, their background, or their current position, remember Catherine Walsh. Remember that the person filing documents might be the genius who saves your company. Remember that legacy doesn't mean obsolete. And remember that true innovation comes from respecting all forms of knowledge, not just the newest and shiniest. Where are you watching from today? Have you experienced age discrimination or witnessed it? Drop a comment and share your story. And if this resonated with you, hit subscribe. We share stories of people who were underestimated, overlooked, and invisible until they proved everyone wrong. Because at Chronicles of the Unseen, we believe everyone deserves to be valued for what they can contribute, not judged by what they look like or how old they are. Remember, the quiet person in the corner might just be the most powerful person in the room, and they're always watching.